Hey everybody, welcome to Migration Science and Mystery. This is the third installment in our journey following the shorebirds from Panama all the way up to their breeding grounds in Alaska. So my name is Holly, I'm going to be your host for today. I was born and raised locally here in Vancouver. I did both my bachelor's and my master's degree at Fraser University in Vancouver. I've been studying a wide array of birds throughout my studies. Including seabirds and songbirds and even the shorebirds that we're going to be meeting here today. So Migration Science and Mystery has been following these birds, as I said, from their wintering grounds in Panama all the way up to Alaska. And so we're here today at the Fraser River Delta. This is Boundary Bay, which is an important stopover along the flyway for the Western Sandpiper. It's important because of its size, but also because it is the last good stopover for them before they go all the way up to the Stikine River, which we'll be visiting in a later program. So we know that the birds will be migrating a total of 6,535 miles, or 10,580 kilometers in their journey from to the Arctic slope where they breed. And then after breeding, they make the round trip all the way back down to their breeding grounds, a total of 13,000 miles, which is done every year, which is a pretty incredible thing. So we've been following these birds here during their stopover, and to give you a bit of information about what's going on here, I have a few experts to answer some questions. So first I have Rob Butler, who is a research scientist with Environment Canada and an expert on Fraser River ecology. I also have Ron Ydenberg, who is with the Centre for Wildlife Ecology at Fraser University, where I did my degrees. And we also have Lynn Pollard, who's out here with his students from Bayridge Elementary, which is a local school, and they're going to look around and see what they can find and tell you what they've learned out here today. So I want to take this moment to thank our sponsors, the U.S. Forest Service, the National Audubon Society, the Prince William Network, and some organizations, Fraser Delta, including Environment Canada, the Centre for Wildlife Ecology at Fraser University, and Bayridge Elementary, which brings the students here today. So a reminder that this program is interactive. You can send in your emails and we'll have the experts try to answer your questions. The email address is up on your screen. It's pwninfo@aol.com. So today our objective is to do a few things. First, we want to learn about technologies that are used by scientists trying to understand shorebirds and help with their conservation. We want to learn about migration, about the science of migration from experts and from students that are learning firsthand here today. And we want to see shorebirds in their natural habitat, which is what's behind me. And we want to learn about what shorebirds need in order to have their successful journey during this long migration. So first, I want to introduce you to the first expert we have today, Rob Butler, who is a research scientist at the Canadian Wildlife Service and an expert Fraser River Delta. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Holly.
How are you doing today on this blustery day?
Oh, it's chilly, but it's a great day to be out here.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what kind of birds we can see here on the Fraser Delta?
Well, the Fraser is one of the best places in Canada to see birds. We have about 300 species of birds we can see every year here. But in terms of the shorebirds, there's probably maybe around 30, 35 species in total that we see each year. The most numerous one, of course, is the Western Sandpiper, which is what this story is all about. On top of that, there are Dunlin and Dowitchers and many, many other shorebirds that are also doing this migration up here through Canada.
Okay, so there's lots of neat birds we can see. But why is it that they decide to stop here on the Fraser Delta?
Well, the Fraser is one of these unique places in Canada, particularly here on the west coast, where we actually have big, extensive mudflats. Most of the coast is very, very rocky, and it's not a great spot for these kinds of birds. They like to feed in the mud, so they have to go wherever the mud is. And there aren't many places like that here in Canada. This one here at the mouth of the Fraser is created by the river itself. All the sediments that come down the river have created this extensive mudflat.
So is that what makes the Fraser River special?
That's what makes it special. It's also very mild here in the winter, and so things are very productive through the entire year. So we have huge numbers of birds through the winter as well as on migration.
Great. So we know that they've stopped here for one of the legs of their stopover, but where are they going to go next?
Well, the next stop is up in the Stikine River Delta, about 800 to 1,000 kilometers north of us in Alaska. And between here and there, it's very, very rocky and very difficult for these birds to make that kind of a flight. But that's the key thing, is to fuel up here and make the next leg of that journey.
So that's a difficult, long way that they have to go. But the Stikine is the next place that we're going to be visiting too.
That's right.
So what happens if we're going to lose one of these stopover sites, either San Francisco Bay or this one or any of the ones up the coast?
Well, let's hope we don't lose them. That's what all the science is about, is to try to look at this. But imagine if you were trying to hop across a stream on a set of stepping stones and somebody was to remove one of those stepping stones. Could you make that hop and make it across? It may be very difficult. It's happening for these sandpipers. This is a stepping stone on this migration. And if this one was removed, could they fly all the way from California up to Alaska? We don't know.
Okay, so there's some really important things to think about for conservation.
That's for sure.
So thank you, Rob. Thanks
All
for
right.
telling us about that. Okay, next I want to introduce you to Ron Ydenberg, who is the professor at Simon Fraser University and the director of the Center for Wildlife Ecology. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Holly.
How are you doing?
I'm well.
Good. So can you tell us what you think is important about what is vital for research for conservation of shorebirds?
Well, what we especially need to know to conserve shorebirds is more knowledge. Our basic understanding of the needs of a lot of these species is still really rudimentary. There's lots of things we don't know. In some cases, we barely have population estimates. We don't know how many numbers of birds there are, and we know very little about some of their ecology. We need a lot more knowledge.
So what kind of tools do you use to find out this information?
Well, researchers like me use a variety of tools. Probably seen us all carrying this as a pair of binoculars, good optics, because you often need to be able to see long distances to count birds or see what they're doing. We use a variety of traps like this mist net behind us, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But we also use a lot of modern sophisticated technology. For example, there's about 60 western sandpipers flying at the moment from Panama with small radio transmitters glued to their backs. And we're listening to find out just when and where those birds are going. We can use modern technologies like element analysis to ask where feathers were grown. Western sandpipers grow their flight feathers on the wintering areas, and so we're able to analyze that and get a fingerprint that tells us exactly where they spent the winter. And things like blood sampling can tell us how well they've been feeding by analyzing triglyceride levels, basically fat levels in the blood, to tell us how well they're fattening on these different places. And we use this and a whole array of similar modern technology to help us understand more about what birds are doing.
So there's a wide array from low-tech all the way up to high-tech things.
That's
It's
it,
amazing,
yeah.
all the things that you can do to find out this information. So apparently there's still a lot we don't know about shorebirds, even the bare minimum that we need to be able to conserve them. So what more things do we need to do to conserve them?
Well, in general, for conservation, we need three things, I think. We need especially more knowledge, which I've already mentioned. We need to protect many more places like this to give them some sort of protection so that birds can use them. And I think perhaps most importantly, we need better awareness. And that's what programs like this are for, to help bring an awareness for what all of these things, how important all of these places are for these magnificent migrations that birds are undertaking.
Great. So Ron, I know some of the kids have been asking about how can you get involved and how did you become a scientist? Like we want to know how is it that somebody like you or somebody at home could become someone like you that inspired you to become a scientist?
Well, I became interested in natural history as a boy, beginning with birds. And in fact, I can remember the exact event, and many people my age might remember this. Blue Ribbon Coffee and Brook Bond Tea, I remember these things. They had a little album that you could collect the cards from and paste them in albums. And that's the thing that happened to me in primary school that sparked my interest. And I learned later as a university student that I could combine that with my love for science and bring both of those things to bear in order to be able to study things like this.
See, there's some inspiration at home for you guys. Somebody who started out as someone your age and has now become a scientist. So see, it's possible. So, okay, Ron, so behind us we have a mist net. You were talking about this is one of the techniques that we use to capture birds. So can you tell us a little bit about what it's used for and what it is?
Well, for many of the things that we do, we want to catch a bird so that we can get it in hand and measure it. And this net is really just a very fine mesh, and there's some guy wires here strung so that it's baggy behind. And what happens is that it's very difficult to see, and a bird flying along will just pop in there and then hang down in the net here and get a bit tangled. And with a little bit of practice, you can learn to extract it. And then we can have the bird in hand, we can put a band on it, we can take small blood sample, we can take a little bit of feather, and all of those things tell us a lot about the bird, where it came from, and how well it's been feeding recently.
So this simple technology will give you a lot of information quite easily.
That's right, and a lot of our time is spent standing out there on the mud flat with a number of these panels spread out, usually not so windy as it is today, trying to catch birds.
Great. So what do you do with the information that you get once you've collected that data?
Well, these data go into our data banks, which are now fairly extensive. We've been collecting data here since the late 19s. That's an unbroken chain of effort by the Canadian Wildlife Service. And we can use it especially to ask questions about hypotheses. So, for example, it appears that numbers of western sandpipers are plummeting at the moment. The decline over the past decade, measured here, is more than 80%. There's a couple of different possible reasons for that. These are competing hypotheses, and we try to challenge those hypotheses with data to figure out which of them is the best explanation for what we're actually seeing.
Great.
So that's how those data are used.
That's great. So is there anything else that you can, any other some interesting things that you found besides just the population decline?
Well, one of the most interesting recent discoveries is that the recovery of peregrine falcons. This was a bird that was endangered after DDT. You and your teachers have perhaps talked about this, but their numbers have climbed steadily over the past 30 years, and western sandpipers and probably a lot of other migrants changed a lot of the things that they're doing, we think, in response to the presence of these peregrines. And if you were here with us yesterday, you saw these fantastic flights out here of the birds swirling and dodging, trying to get away from peregrines. And we think many of the other things they do on migration are related to evading peregrines.
Great. So there's so much to learn out here just coming out. There's
yeah.
so much to learn. So speaking of learning, we have Lynn Pollard here, who's a teacher from Bayridge Elementary, and he's got his students with him. So, hi Lynn, how you doing?
How you doing?
Great.
Lovely weather.
Yeah, it's wonderful. We're field scientists. This is what we do.
Exactly. This is what it's all about.
So tell us what you guys found out there.
Well, we've been out on the flats, and we've been doing two things. We've been looking for birds, and with our scopes and binoculars, and then we've been using the real high-tech stuff.
Yeah.
You know, margarine tubs, and taking a look at what's actually in the mud. And it turns out there's a lot of stuff in the mud.
Good.
Right. And actually, Grace is going to tell us a little bit about some.
Great.
Okay, so we found
Hold it up.
lots of different things, but in particular, we found lots of worms, especially bloodworms. They're little red worms that you usually find curled up in a ball or a circular shape. And they are special because they have blood kind of similar to ours because they have hemoglobin, and there's also some little orange worms in there that are plentiful, and we found many of them around here. And also we learned that the shorebirds have on the end of their beaks, they have some special sensory nerves, like the ones on our fingertips, that help them find the worms in the water.
Okay, good. And Roberta's going to do a little bit more. That was mostly the worms, and here's Roberta.
Okay, so we also found I think we found some amphipods, and we also found some comb jellies, which is kind of cool because unlike most jellyfish, they don't have tentacles. Well, they do, but it's more around their skin and not coming down from their skin. And we also found a stickleback in breeding plumage, which was pretty cool. And we also found some hermit crabs and stuff like that. And we also learned that in some of these piles of mud, which are kind of greenish, they're actually full with algae and diatoms, which are really full of nutrients, which are pretty good for the birds.
Great. We found lots of stuff. Good.
And then, I think it was the birds next. And then these are the birds that we saw.
Look at the camera.
We saw a peregrine falcon, and we saw quite a few western sea sandpipers, and we saw some yellow and some Dunolin sandpipers. We also saw a harrier and a green-winged teal.
Good. And the peregrine we saw yesterday, the peregrine came flying right over, and we actually saw it trying to hit a shorebird. And so Kevin's going to talk a little bit about that.
Well, as you just mentioned, they come down and try and get the shorebirds. And what they do is they come down and they try to dive down onto them. They've been clocked at about 90 miles an hour in this dive. So the shorebirds have a bit of a dilemma here, because they've got to get a lot of food so that they can make the journey up north. But if they come too close to the shore here, they'll be marked up against the grass here, and the peregrines will easily just come down and take them. And then also, if they get too fat from their feeding, then they can't get away from the peregrines. So they've got to stay a little thin, and they've still got to work up all their body.
It's a tricky.
Yeah.
And speaking of what they have to do, Alex is going to talk about the actual migration and the jumps they make.
Okay, so the migration actually started with the female shorebirds and sandpipers in Panama, and later on they joined the male shorebirds in Mexico. And throughout a few stops that there have been, this is one of them, and it started here at the 16th, and it will end around the end of April. And the thing is, now they will go from here up to Alaska, and later on up. And the interesting thing is, shorebird was clocked for 42 hours at 3,000 kilometers, and that's quite a bit out there.
Great. So we need to move on to some questions from people at home. So
Okay.
I'll come over here and get the questions. Gonna go here? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so the first one, I'll just come over here. So how can the birds fly such long distances? Who wants to answer that one?
Well, I could take that one on. One of the things the birds have to do is put on enough fuel to make this flight. And the fuel that they have will be burnt up in about a day or so. So the fuel is the thing that's really critical to being able to power the flight. The other thing that they do is, as you can see, it's a very windy day here today. This is perfect for migration for these birds because the wind will give them an assistance and speed up the flight so they can make a long distance flight. The third thing they do is they fly at very high elevations. So they'll be up above the mountains, some of them upwards of 10,000 feet, taking advantage of these high elevation winds, and they'll streak across the sky to the next spot in Alaska.
Okay, so the other question is similar to that. They want to know how many times do the birds stop between their wintering grounds and their breeding grounds?
Well, there's about 6 or 7 major stopover sites. They don't always stop at each one. Sometimes if the wind is good, they'll bypass them. But many of them will stop 6, 7, 8 times on the migration.
This one is about energy and food. They want to know what food gives the birds the most energy.
Well, western sandpipers have a variety of things to eat, all very small animals in the mud, but they also feed on the diatom sludge or film on the top of the mud. Both of these things give them a lot of energy, and they have to eat a lot. So on a flight from here to the Stikine River, which is about 900 kilometers, they probably have to burn about 1.5 grams of fat, and it probably takes them 2 or 3 days to build that up.
Wow. So this one is about conservation laws. They want to know, are Canadian laws the same as the U.S. laws for protecting the birds?
Very similar. The Migratory Bird Convention Act, which was signed in 1916 between Canada and the U.S., is still in power. And it's one that protects migratory birds such as these sandpipers in both Canada and the United States. And then there's other laws too. We have provincial laws similar to the state laws in the U.S. And then areas such as this that have been set aside, they have protection under state and in some cases federal legislation as well. So the laws are very, very similar.
Okay, so somebody wants to know when the birds sleep on their journey and where they do it.
Well, birds have an unusual mode of sleeping. And if you look at a bird, you can see that its eye might be open, but the eye on the other side might be closed. And so unlike us, who close both of our eyes and sleep with our whole brain, birds sleep with one half of the brain at one time and the other half at another time. And what makes it more unusual is they sleep for only a few seconds at a time. If you watch a bird sitting there, and a western sandpiper might be out in a roost, one leg tucked up in its feathers, the eye might be open and then it will close for a few seconds, and then the brain is sleeping, doing whatever the brain does when it sleeps. Then that eye will open and the one on the other side will close, and they'll alternate like that. They can probably also sleep while they're flying, and a lot of birds do that.
That'd be really useful for meetings.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, all the people at home, when your teacher says, "Are you awake?" You say, "Oh, half my brain is sleeping."
Yeah.
You don't have that excuse. So this one's from Barber Bush Elementary in Texas. Alexis wants to know what happens to the baby birds when the adults leave them.
Well, the young birds up in Alaska are left alone, and the adults migrate south through here in July. The young come on their own. They depart Alaska sometime in late July and into August, and so we'll see all of the young ones coming on their own. They have some instinctive ability to know which way to go because they come through the same migration routes. The amazing thing is that some of these birds, some of the young ones, some of the adults, will cross the continent. So they're not just here on the Pacific coast. Some of them that we've marked here have been seen in Kansas, and from Kansas they go on down to the Everglades. So it's an amazing migration. These birds have never done it before in their lives, but they seem to know which way to go.
It's incredible. So this one also from Barber Bush Elementary in Texas. What birds attack the shorebirds?
Well, they have a wide variety of predators, mostly other bigger birds, various hawks, and especially falcons. And yesterday, and also this morning, we saw a number of attacks by peregrines, as one of our students here mentioned. And peregrines are very dangerous for small shorebirds.
Great, so this one's from Barber Bush Elementary in Texas as well. Kimberly wants to know, what did you study to be able to work with birds?
Why don't you take that one, Rob?
Okay. After finishing my high school, I went to university, to Simon Fraser University, where Ron and I did our undergrad. And I went on to the University of British Columbia for a PhD. Studied herons, actually, there at University of British Columbia. So I got my academic training at the local universities, and I was fortunate to pick up a job with the Canadian Wildlife Service partway through that because of the field work that I'd done, and I was just one of the fortunate few.
There goes the marsh hawk.
Oh yeah, a harrier
Right
just
behind
went
us.
right by.
That's great. Okay, so we'll take a question here from the kids.
It's a little bit different from yesterday. Besides the actual size and on the wings, is there anything else on the bird that you can use to tell if they are a baby or an adult?
Did you hear the question?
I didn't hear the question.
She wants to know whether there's some way with their plumage or any other characteristic that you can tell the age of the bird.
Well, yeah, in western sandpipers, the babies grew their feathers. In Alaska, of course, they were like all other birds with down. Then they shed that down and grow feathers. And there's differences in the coloration of the feathers and some of the color marks, and of course how new the feathers are. So adult western sandpipers, when they're coming back here, they're flying on flight feathers that they grew in Panama the year before. So they flew to Alaska, and then they're on their way back. So that feather has got 15,000 kilometers worth of wear on it. It's like the tires on your car. When they've been on there for a while, they wear and you can tell. But a bird that was born that summer has a new feather, and you can see that with a little bit of experience, clear as day. So if we got a bird in hand, we could tell right away.
Okay, so this question from Barber Bush Elementary from Juan. He wants to know, do you share information with other biologists from Panama all the way to Alaska?
Yeah, we have an extensive network of people working on western sandpipers. It's called the Western Sandpiper Research Network, and we share a lot of info between all of us. Good question, Juan.
You want to take one, Min?
I'm kind of curious because there's a lot of birds out there on the beach. When they're feeding, do they actually fight each other for the right to eat, or do they just work together?
Okay. They don't seem to compete very much. They keep a distance from one another, and they move around sort of together. You see a little bit of bumping and things going on occasionally, but they generally just keep away from one another. And I think it's just a matter of just keeping their distance. Everybody, we all feel there's a comfortable distance too, and they all just do the same thing.
Okay, so this one from Barber Bush Elementary. Jarvis wants to know, what happens to birds if they meet with bad storms during their flights?
Oh, it's a good question. We have actually seen large numbers of birds along the coast in British Columbia down on the rocks during a very, very strong westerly wind, which is a headwind. It stops them from migrating. And as soon as that wind shifted and became a southeasterly like this one we're seeing here today, all of those birds picked up, and we saw about 100,000 of these birds lift, and off they went. So it's really important for them to get this right. The fortunate thing here is that with this kind of storm coming in here regularly every spring, we will see large numbers of birds moving on There's big flocks out here now that are just gathering in on the mudflat as the wind is picking up. You can see them over on the horizon there, just getting ready to migrate. And we heard some this morning, actually calling. There's a special call they give, and off they went in this wind. And this wind will probably blow for another 24 hours or so and carry them to the next site. Good question.
Okay, Lynn, another one?
Okay, I'm just kind of
Watch it
curious
there.
because I've heard this happens with other animals, but do birds see colors like we do?
Yes, and in fact, recently there's been a lot of interest in color vision in birds, and it turns out that not only do many of them see as well as we do, they see other colors that we don't see in the UV, the ultraviolet end of the spectrum. So we've all heard about before how good the vision is of things like eagles and falcons, but they're also very, very good at seeing lots of colors. So they have very, very good eyes. Yeah.
Okay, so the next one asks, when do the birds know when to stop and rest during their journey?
That's a very good question. We really don't know when that happens. They're trying, of course, to get to the next mudflat, and it probably has something again to do with the winds. If the conditions are good, they still have lots of fuel, then they will keep flying. But we really don't know what causes them to stop, other than they do.
And they also want to know, has global warming had any effect on the area or on bird migration?
We've actually looked at this with some of our research, and it appears that the global warming effects on the wind will have a small effect on the birds, but the big one will be if there's any sea level rise. As you can see, the tide is right up here now on the high tide, continues to rise, then this beach will become narrower, and it'll be a not as favorable place for them to feed. And that will be found all down the Pacific coast, of course. So we should probably see some pretty big changes in the next 20, 30 years or so.
And if I could add,
Yep.
Global warming is going to have the biggest effects in the Arctic, where of course these birds breed, and it's going to have big changes on changing habitats and shifting places where they could breed. And you know, those kinds of things that might happen there we can just try and anticipate. We don't understand any of those things yet.
Want to take one more? Last question?
And yesterday we had the chance of finding a sand sculpin and some other things, and I was wondering, do the seabirds, the shorebirds, eat the sand sculpins?
No, they don't eat the fish. They're just feeding on the tiny invertebrates, the little worms and things that are in the mud.
Okay, one more? No? Okay. So we're out of time now, so we're going to have to move on. So the questions were really good questions, weren't they? Mm-hmm. So let's summarize first what we've learned today. So we've learned that research is really critical for conservation of shorebirds. We know that there's very little that we know about shorebirds, but that there's a lot more we need to do in order to conserve them, and more science is important. So the other thing is that shorebirds are important for everybody because along the flyway, they stop from Panama to Mexico, into the United States and in Canada, so everybody has a responsibility to help conserve them. It's everybody's responsibility because they belong to all of us. And also it's important to have a passion for conservation. As we've seen, our experts here have shared how they got their start, and that it's important that everyone at home knows that you could do the same thing. If you're passionate about ecology and about conservation, then these are the people that have gotten there, and that gives you an understanding of how to get there yourself. So I want to thank all the people that we've had here today, Ron Ydenberg and Rob Butler, and Lynn Pollard and his students from Bayridge Elementary. So that was great having you guys, lots of great information. We want to thank our sponsors, the U.S. Forest Service, the National Audubon Society, the Prince William Network, and the sponsors here at the Fraser Delta, the Centre for Wildlife Ecology and Environment Canada. So we encourage you guys to go to the website and continue following the migration. We're going to be moving all the way up to their breeding grounds. The next stop is going to be in the Stikine River Delta near Wrangell, Alaska, and there will be a live broadcast there on May 3rd. And on May 10th, there will be a live broadcast and webcast from the Copper River Delta near Cordova, Alaska. So thanks everybody for joining us today. That's the end of our show. That's all the time we have. So I just encourage you to keep up your interest in ecology and in science and in conservation, and keep following the webcast, and keep on the website. Keep sending your emails. We'll keep answering them as well. So thank you. Thanks everybody.
After finishing my high school, I went to university, to Fraser University, where Ron and I did our undergraduates together.
Days to build that up.
Wow. So this one is about conservation laws. They want to know, are Canadian laws the same as the U.S. laws for protecting the birds?
Well, they're very similar. The Migratory Bird Convention Act, which was signed in 1916 between Canada and the U.S., is still in and it's one that protects migratory birds such as these sandpipers in both Canada and the United States. And then there's other laws too. We have provincial laws similar to the state laws in the U.S. And then areas such as this that have been set aside, they have protection under state and in some cases federal legislation as well. So the laws are very, very similar.
Okay.
About the migrating shorebirds. Email your questions to pwninfo@aol.com or use the email form located just under this webcast link. We will be answering all of your questions during the show.
their start, and that it's important that everyone at home knows that you could do the same thing. If you're passionate about ecology and about conservation, then these are the people that have gotten there, and that gives you an understanding of how to get there yourself. So I want to thank